Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Well, if you've been following this channel, then you know that I wrote a book, Simple Quilts for the Modern Home. And every month for the next year, we're going to sew through one of the patterns. And the patterns are arranged from easiest to hardest in the book. So if you are a new quilter, you can work on some of the patterns that we are showing first to sort of build your skill level. And then, or if you just need something done fast, that's a great one to pick as well. And then we'll gradually add skills as we go through the year. The fabric requirements and all the cutting instructions and assembly diagrams are all in the book, so you can get that at our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. And the videos are meant to be supplemental, so they kind of, if you're a visual learner and you do better by seeing somebody do something, we're going to show you how to actually put the blocks together in the video. But if you want the measurements and everything else, support us. Buy the book. It's exciting. If you get it from us, I will sign every single copy. So I really love this quilt going north. I know I said it goes from easiest to hardest. This isn't necessarily the absolute easiest one to do, but it is really simple and you're only doing one panel. One of the hallmarks of the modern quilting movement is having a lot of negative space, and we take advantage of that in this pattern. So we're going to piece one panel and then we're going to have just bits of fabric cut up and sewn to the sides. So that's really fun. I'm going to show you how to get it together here. It's a little bit different method of doing half square triangles, but it's really fun. You can get absolutely perfect points with it. So to start, we are going to need some strips, and in the pattern it's going to tell you to do with the fabric strips. For the demonstration here, I've cut those in half, so I'm working with essentially the same length of fabric as you would have if you had a fat quarter, but you're going to want to do the entire width of fabric so that you have enough to make your quilt. But we're just going to work with a little bit shorter piece here, so that way the video isn't ridiculously long for you all. So you're going to have just 4 colors to go with this quilt. So you can pick your 4 colors that are most prevalent in your home decor, and you can choose those. We are going to have kits available for this quilt. This is considered a basic fabric by Art Gallery Fabrics. I love their fabrics because they are super soft and silky to work with, and they drape really nicely. And I use them for a lot of the book, and their fabrics hang around for a long time. So as long as they're still printing these, we're going to be able to have kits available for them. So if you really love this, you can get it. If not, then you can choose your own that work with your own home decor. You do need background to go with this as well. Again, all those measurements are in the book. So I've set my machine up to sew a 1/4 inch seam, but whenever I'm sewing strip sets together, I like to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam. That way if I get off a little bit as I'm sewing the long seam, it's not going to matter as much. That's totally optional. So, but if you want to do a scant 1/4 inch seam, you just are going to move your needle one needle position to the right. So for me, I just have to hit a little button and it pops over. So on my machine, I'm sewing on a Baby Lock Jubilant. That's a 6.0 stitch. 5.5 is the normal one that it's set to if you've got a standard presser foot on your machine and a piecing stitch on your machine. So to strip piece, if you've never done it before, you're just going to layer everything right sides together. And in this case, I'm also going to make sure that my triangles are pointing in the same direction. This is directional fabric, so I want to make sure that everything is pointing north, going up. So now that I see that these two are together, I can go ahead and sew these, flip these right sides together and sew right down the side there. Now, whenever I'm sewing strip pieces, I see a lot of times people try to hold it like way back and get it together, but I only line up as much as I can fit on my sewing machine throat space. And then I'll just put my fingers on top of it and kind of let them come forward until they hit my presser foot, and then I just reposition everything, make sure my edges are still nice and lined up, and then repeat that process. Now when you get to the end, you can chain piece these to save you some time. So what I've got is I've got these lined up. Again, all my triangles are pointing up, so I'm going to layer these right sides together. Then I'm just going to get my strips nice and lined up and start piecing. One question, sometimes even with the same fabric manufacturer, your strips will end up a different length. That's okay. It's all right if they end up being different lengths, because you're going to cut them all down later when you strip piece. So you're just going to keep going, sewing your strip sets together until you have all 4 of the fabric combinations together. So now we need to press our seams open, and I prefer to actually press mine open. It makes your block lie a lot flatter. It's really easy to get really perfect points this way, and I've never had a problem where I'm quilting it and it pops or damages a seam. So that's maybe an old wives' tale. I certainly haven't encountered it, and I do this all the time, and I quilt really close to the seams all the time. So what you're going to do to press it open is you're going to take your fingers, and I usually will put 3 fingers down right on that seam line. And then I'll just hold them down just ahead of the iron. Just be careful you don't move your iron faster than your hands, so you don't burn yourself. But I just keep the nose of that iron right down, going straight through. And then I have a nice flat open seam. What you want to watch for is sometimes you can get little wiggles on the back, and that means that there's a pleat on the front. So if your seam doesn't look like this, where it's perfectly straight, if there's like a little bend in it somewhere, that means you've done something wrong and you need to fix it, and you'll have a little wiggle on the front that you can see. So I need to press this from the front too. I like to do that just to kind of set everything and get it good and flat. And now I'm going to repeat that with my other strip sets. So I've got my regular 6x24" ruler that I use. It's the frosted one from Olfa. I really like it because I can see what I'm doing underneath. That frosted kind of gives it a little tint. And you can see there are these diagonal lines all across the ruler, and they indicate 15, 30, 45, and 60-degree marks. I'll give you a little close-up so you can see where those numbers are. So Fiskars and Olfa, I know, have these marks on them, and they are probably the 2 most popular ruler brands. So if you don't have one that has these, make sure, and you bought the book, make sure you go get one that does. You may have never paid attention to these before because you haven't had to use them, but we use them a lot in the book throughout different patterns. And the first one we're going to use today is a 45-degree line, and I'm going to show you how to use that to cut these into half square triangles. When you first start doing this, and I even have to remind myself if it's been a while since I've done it, there may be a little flipping of the ruler around until you get it lined up exactly the way you want it. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put that 45-degree line here, even with my seam allowance. And I'm going to move it over until I'm no longer in the selvage on the left side of the ruler here. So once I've got that nice and in line all the way down that seam allowance, and I know I'm not going to be hitting that selvage, I can go ahead and give this a trim. All right, so now I've cut 1/2 of my triangle. Now what I need to do, I had my ruler like this, I need to flip it, and I need to line the 45-degree line up with that seam again. And this time, scooch it over until the top edge of the ruler is even with the top point of my piece. Once I have that situated, I can go ahead and cut again. So now we've cut 1/2 of a half square triangle where the orange, the darker orange, is the long strip and the peach is the short one. Now the next one is going to be reverse of that. I'll show you how that works. So I'm going to flip my ruler again. Still, I'm always measuring with that 45-degree line, even with that seam allowance. And this time I'm flipping it so that the right edge of my ruler is even with the bottom of that triangle point. So you're always getting it even with the triangle point when you are cutting these. All right, so I've got that, and now I can give this a little cut and trim. So now out of the same strip set, I was able to get 2 different looking halves of half square triangles. So they're always going to be the reverse of each other. You're going to go ahead and keep cutting down the rest of your strip and make sure that you pay attention to your instructions in the going north pattern, because you need a specific number of each of these, and it tells you in the book. So make sure you go through that so you end up with the right amount. So I've got all my triangles trimmed, and now I need to cut the other half so that I can make my half square triangle. Now, if you are using a directional print, there's a specific yardage instruction for you because you want everything to be going in the same direction. So you're going to need additional fabric because you're not going to be able to use half of the half square triangle. So that way, when you're all done, everything is pointing up. So in this case, I want, when everything is said and done, it to look like this, where all of my triangles are pointing up because I'm going to have a large piece with the fabric that is pointing up next to it on this side and then also on this side. So that means I need to trim across from corner to corner and turn it on its side just so that it is a little bit more ergonomic for me to cut. And I'm just going to line my ruler up from point to point, and then I'm just going to slice. So now when these two go together, my directions are going to be pointing up, whereas if I would use the other side, it would be pointing down. It would look a little funny when we put the entire quilt together. So I'm just going to put this to the side so that I don't mix it up and accidentally use it. All right, so that's going to take care of all of my ones that are going to be on the left side of the block. Now for the right side of the block, you're probably going to have to cut in a different direction because, again, we want everything to be facing up. So the easiest way to do that and figure it out is to just lay a triangle on top of it, and then you can see when the triangle is pointing to the bottom left corner, here's where everything is going up. So I need to trim across this diagonal. Move the triangle out of the way so I don't accidentally get it. And now we've successfully cut directional fabric so that when it's placed in the quilt, it's going to be going in the right way. So for all your left side pieces, you're going to be trimming from the bottom left to the top right. For all your right side pieces, you're going to be trimming from the top left to the bottom right. So just do the tricks that I showed you if you want it to be directional. If that's too much for you, then just pick a print that isn't directional and you don't have to worry about it, and you can use both sides of your half square triangle and it won't matter. So for this tutorial, I'm going to sew together the bottom two rows of the quilt, and once you know how to do that, you're going to be able to do the rest of it. I'm keeping my sewing machine on that scant 1/4 inch stitch. I like to have a little bit skinnier seam when I'm sewing half square triangles, so I have a little bit more wiggle room when I'm trimming them down to size later. That's optional. But if you can do that and you're comfortable with doing it, go for it. All right, so what we're going to do here is I've laid them out for the bottom two rows. You're going to flip them right sides together. And what I like to do is kind of line up my points. And it's possible that your half square triangle that we pieced might be a little bit smaller than the one behind. I like to make that a little bigger so that way, again, we have wiggle room when we are trimming. Now, when you're first getting started, we're going to sew completely on a bias seam that has been trimmed. So if you're used to doing half square triangles from squares, like my preferred method, this is going to be a little bit stretchier than what you're used to. So I would recommend pinning for the first couple of times that you do this, just so that it doesn't get too out of whack. So what you're going to do is you're going to just pin at the corners, just to kind of keep those places in line, so that way they don't get too far off of each other when you are sewing. Now you can go ahead and start sewing. Make sure you remove those pins as you come to them. And then just make sure your edges are lined up and that you are not pulling on the fabric, because if you pull on it, you could stretch that bias seam out and then your block will not lie flat. You just want to let the feed dogs guide it through. All right, so I'm going to repeat that and just chain stitch the rest of these together. So just like when I was pressing the seams open for the strip sets, I also like to press the seams open on my half square triangles for all the same reasons. Your block lies flatter and you're able to get those points exactly where you want them to be. The process is the same. You're going to first put your 3 fingers open to open that seam up, and then with the nose of your iron straight down the center of that seam, just drag it down the center. Don't go too crazy here because it is a bias seam. You don't want it to stretch out of place, but you do want to get it nice and flat. Then I usually hit it from the front side as well so that I've got my nice half square triangle. And again, everything's pointing in the right direction, so we're on the right track. Now it's time to trim our half square triangle blocks down. I know it's tempting to skip this step, but this is what leads to really accurate piecing because your blocks are the exact size they're supposed to be in order to fit nicely with everything else that gets sewn to it. So take the time and do this. You will not regret it. So you may not have too much to trim down here, but what I'm doing here is I'm first lining my 45-degree line of my square ruler, and 6.5-inch ruler is plenty good for this, but I can't find it, so I'm using my 12.5. And I'm making sure that I've got a little bit of fabric hanging past the measurement I need to trim to and past the edges or right on the edges. Either is fine. But as long as I've got that 45-degree line and fabric hanging past where I need to trim, I'm going to be able to get this perfectly to size and get my points absolutely fabulous. So first I'm going to trim up the right and the top sides. Then I'm going to give this a 180-degree flip. And now this time I'm going to line up my left and bottom edges exactly with the line that I need to cut to. I still have my 45-degree line going straight up and down that seam, down the center, and that will make sure my points stay where they should be. I'm going to go ahead and give it a cut again on the right and top sides. And now I have a perfect half square triangle with my points going right out to the edge, which is exactly what we want because then it's going to be really easy to get everything to come together when we assemble the quilt. So continue doing that for the rest of your half square triangles, and we're going to come back and sew our quilt top together. Before I start sewing, we're going to go over how to pin these blocks. It's a little bit different than you probably have been used to doing, but it's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. So you'll notice that these are going to come together exactly in the center of your block as well as your angles at the top. So I'm going to start by pinning first my centers together. So I'm going to flip them over right sides together. I usually pinch the side that I'm supposed to pin so that way I don't forget in between when I grab it and pin. And what I do is I look at that from the top, and you can kind of see how the seams are coming together. You can see that the yellow and the pink are both starting at the same point. If you have any concerns about that, you can always open it up and also make sure that everything is on the same line. So once I'm pretty confident that I've got those two right on top of each other, I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to pin in the right side of that seam allowance, going along the diagonal of that seam. That way when I'm sewing along like this, I can sew until my needle is down in this seam allowance and only then pull this pin. If you have a presser foot where there is like a guide on the right side, you're going to want to pin from the right side because otherwise you'll have to pull this pin too soon. If you have that kind of foot, you know what I mean. You always have to pull your pins really early with that. So now with the top of this, I want to do basically the same thing. Since we have trimmed it so that those points are going straight to the corner, technically your point should line up, but not always. So what you want to do is kind of just pull it back and make sure that your seams are right on top of each other. I usually look from the top like this. And once I'm confident that I've got it where I want it to be, I am again going to pin on the right side of that seam allowance. And this one, I'm just going to have it hold in until I get that first needle down and take those first couple of stitches, then I'll pull it out. I'm going to pin my other one together and then start sewing. So I'm just going to slide my piece underneath and I'm going to leave the pin in for now. I'm going to take just a couple of stitches until I really have that first seam allowance secured so that way my point turns out really perfect at the top. I'm going to go ahead and keep on sewing. Keep in mind that we're sewing on a bias seam here, and so it can stretch out, so just don't tug anything, just let the feed dogs take it. Once my needle is firmly in the bottom, or that first half of that seam allowance, then I'll take my pins out, and then I kind of just hold my points together at the end with my fingers, but you could feel free to pin that as well. when I get to this point, what I do is I put my finger on the side of my presser foot, and that way I'm able to guide and keep my 1/4 inch seam nice and steady through that entire block. All right, I'm going to repeat that on my other one, and then we're ready to sew this together. So just like before, I'm going to press these seams open. This is also kind of our moment of truth to see how those points turned out. So let's take a peek at that first. Oh, very nice. These are coming together just right where they should be. And this one is as close as it could be without being right on. The other good thing about pressing open is you won't have it like flip to the side and then a point could look higher than it actually is. When you press it open and flat, they are going to stay exactly where you sewed them, and it looks fabulous. Now, say you didn't like where something turned out. You wouldn't have to rip the whole thing. You could just rip from here to here, resew that section, and then you're good to go. All right, so the only different thing about pressing open at this point is you kind of have a lot of seams going on. So you just want to be careful and pay attention to make sure you're not flipping any of these seams going in a direction they shouldn't be going. But I am loving this. These points are as good as they could be. I'm very excited with how that has turned out. So for this next part, you're going to have 3 sizes of rectangles that you're going to sew to either side, which will help create the offset. Basically, you have a skinny rectangle, you have a square, and then you have a long rectangle. And depending on where things are going to go, it'll create different offsets of that. All that is included in your book, so make sure you pick up a copy of Simple Quilts from the Modern Home over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com, and you will be able to grab that for yourself and get all the instructions. I'm going to show you the first 2 rows here, and so you can just see how to put that together and how to assemble the 2 rows. All right, so I've got everything lined up. In this case, I've got a skinny rectangle and a square to go down here, and I'm just going to flip these right sides together and sew. I'm not going to pin because these are not bias seams here and here, so it's going to be really easy to just sew those together without worrying about any stretching. But if you're a newbie, I suggest pinning at the top and at the bottom of your seams. I'm going to start by sewing the right side down, then the left, and then I'm going to press and join my rows. If these look like they've just switched positions, it's because they have. I accidentally sewed these bits to the wrong side. So the pros make mistakes too, so don't feel bad if you do it at all when you're sewing this together. I'm going to show you how to make sure that this point lines exactly up with this bottom part of the triangle, and then we are done with this tutorial and you have everything you need to make going north. So here's what you're going to do. So ideally, we've got a point here to reference. What I need to do is mark a 1/4 inch in on the wrong side of that seam allowance. So I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to put the 1/4 inch mark even with the edge of that seam where the point is going to meet. Then I'm going to take a friction gel pen. These are great because they go away with heat. And I'm just going to make a mark right on that 1/4 inch seam, and notice that I am leaning in toward that rather than having my marker straight up and down, because that won't give me a true 1/4 inch. You want your tool to be right in contact with that ruler. So you're going to see me use this 2-pinning method a lot through the book. It is how I get perfect points almost every time. And this is what I do. So we're going to flip it over right sides together, and we have our nice hash mark of where we need to pin. So I'm going to put my pin in right where that hash mark is, right where the seam allowance has come together for that strip piece part. Then I'm going to put my pin in right at the tip of the triangles here. And keep in mind, this might not be an exact 1/4 inch away. And what I'm going to do now is, holding this pin straight up and down, I'm going to go ahead and pin across that seam allowance and only then remove this pin. Now you can go ahead and pin as normal, making sure that you hit any seams where they come together. You can be confident that this is going to come together. Now, one tip when you're sewing this is I'm going to sew just to the right of where this hash mark is when I'm sewing down, and that will help ensure that I can see my point when I'm done. And by just to the right, I mean like 1 needle width to the right. You want it to be pretty close. So now I'm going to go ahead and pin at my corners and also inside here. So now you can see that I've sewn pretty much right on top of and just inside of where that hash mark is. I also have sewn just to the inside of where these points are. You can see them on this side and on this side. And that should give us some pretty good points. Let's open it up and see. Oh yeah, that point is going right to the tip of where that is. I haven't lost anything on this side or over here. So that's really awesome. I'm going to give this one final press to open up those seams. Again, be careful that you don't accidentally push any of the other seams we pressed open to the wrong side. So from here, you're going to continue to make these rows, offsetting them according to the instructions in the pattern in the book, Simple Quilts from the Modern Home. Then you're going to sew on either side long widths of fabric, and those instructions and cutting instructions are also in the book. So make sure you get your copy over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. But this is all you need to know in order to get going north together. We'll put a few pictures in as well. So that's the first quilt in the book, Going North. It's one of my favorites. It's really fast to put together because you just had that one panel, and it looks great hanging over the back of a chair or on a wall. And if you just need something fast to gift, this one's just lap size. It goes pretty quick, and you can really have some fun with the quilting on it. Thanks so much for following along. Make sure you get your own copy of Simple Quilts for the Modern Home by me, and you can get that over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. If you order from us, then I'm going to sign the copy, so thank you for that. Otherwise, you can check with your local quilt shop as well to see if you can get it through them. That may be especially a great option if you live overseas or in Canada, because I know that shipping can be expensive. But thanks so much for following along. I hope you get the book. We're going to be doing more of these, working through all the quilts in the book. So some of them look a little intimidating. Don't worry, we are going to walk through them so that way you know how to do them. Thanks so much, and until next time, happy quilting.